Chapter 17. Death Do Us Part. 1. Cassidy, without surprise, had packed her bags a few days early. Nora had taken a week off before we were even to leave, just to help with getting things squared away around the house. We decided to fly into Fargo and rent a car for the 2-hour trip south from there. So it was finally the last day before we flew out. It'd be an early morning flight. All our bags were at the front door. We had our clothes out that we'd be wearing, scattered across dressers and hanging on hangers. We'd taken showers before bed. Nothing to do but splash water in our faces and brush our teeth, throw the bags in the car, and off we go to Jacksonville to board our plane. But there I was, on my back, looking up at the dark. I could see the ceiling fan that was a little off balance, and hear its mesmerizing rhythm. Tink, tink, tink was the sound of the pull chain against the light fixture. My mind wandered. Since we'd made the decision that I go on the mission trip, I'd become excited about going to Salt Creek that summer, like Cassidy. I couldn't wait to tell Mom and Dad about it, and my Christian curiosity. Although I'm sure they'd figured that something was going on with the way my language had cleaned up a little. Besides, Cassidy had still been calling them a couple of times a week, having grown-up-like conversations. Who knows what they talked about? But based on some of what Cassidy would share, it was the promise of breakfasts at the diner with Grandpa, days at the park with everyone, and making cookies with Grandma. These were the things that had her wound up and ready to go, for this was her utopia. Still, with so much good happening, I wondered how could I, Finnegan Barrett, a man with direction, with plans, be so lost? So unsure was I that plans seemed to be in vain. On that day, just after work and before dinner, I decided to mow the front yard, even though it didn't need it much, just to keep the neighbors' judgment at bay while we were gone. Round and round I went, a logarithmic spiral of sorts. My pattern was from the outside in, meticulously cut until there wasn't a blade left. Perfection, yet only temporary. Here it was, yet another way I worked so hard to hold off the inevitable. Then I looked on all the works that my hands had wrought, and on the labor that I had labored to do. And behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit, and there was no profit under the sun. That thing I'd been holding on to resonated in my heart. Control. This control of life was always before me, but never quite achieved. The old hymn echoed, "I surrender all," with the ceiling fan's rhythm. For so many Sunday mornings now, for so many Wednesday nights, and for so many times of meditation, I'd been fighting this call, desperately holding on to the seat on which I sat. If I control nothing, why did I continue this internal battle? I'd watched Peter in the previous few months. He'd become a friend who consistently demonstrated what it was to be a broken man, willing to give away all he had, all he'd worked for. In such a short amount of time, the people of our island were aware of the change in his heart. He asked God, and God gave him wisdom. He asked for mercy that he might be a light in the darkness. On that Sunday morning that Peter let go of the world, he and Sandy were sitting next to the girls and me during the main service. We were all praying. The choir was singing softly. Pastor Smith was plainly asking for hearts to surrender. I stayed. Peter stood. Sandy followed. It wasn't just there that I resisted God. It was everywhere, and always during that time, it seemed. I laugh now as I think about the day that Nora and I went into the pastor's office to tell him that I wanted to go on the mission trip. I was so excited to tell him. His immediate response was that he ran out into the hall to call Otis in. They began to tell us excitedly that they'd been praying for me to make the decision to go, that they'd been doing it for weeks at Otis's house. Nora and I looked at one another, remembering the conversation we'd had about seeing his car. But still, I resisted. One night, while Peter and Sandy were at our home for dinner, Peter said to me, because he'd memorized something new, "Finn, listen to this. Go to now, you that say, today or tomorrow we will go into such a city and continue there a year and buy and sell and get gain. Whereas you know not what shall be on the morrow. For what is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. For that you ought to say, if the Lord will, we shall live and do this or that." His look was desperate as he slowly continued. "This is what I've been longing for, Finn. To view this home, this place, on St. Simon's, on earth. To view it as just a place I am, for a time, according to God's will. Understanding His purpose should be my focus. This mission we're going on in the fall, Finn, it's not soon enough. But I need to realize that even that I must submit to, because even that is a time not yet. Right now, this time is just as important. Right now, I'm here speaking to you. Right now, we can be glorifying God, or maybe even bringing Him shame, all according to our hearts." I pondered these recent memories while lying in bed for nearly 3 hours, looking up, occasionally looking at the curtains as they acted as a canvas for shadows. I was regretting not having a nightcap with Nora just before bed. I looked over at her. I was jealous of her deep sleep. I examined the silhouette of her body against what little light there was. Just as I began to feel my eyes getting heavy, rain began to fall, making its song on the roof. Damn, I gotta pee. I pushed myself out of bed. I stumbled through the bedroom and into the bathroom, closing the door before flipping the light switch. I was washing my hands, half asleep, when the house phone rang. I looked up at the clock next to the sink. 3:35. Who would be calling? A sharp clap of thunder shook the house just before and during the second ring. I dried my hands and opened the door, illuminating the bedroom. Nora pushed herself away from her pillow and onto her elbow, reaching the phone at the bedside. She looked up at me with fear of the unknown and fear of the about-to-be-known. "Hello?" Her voice was one of concern. I stood, wide-eyed, frozen, waiting. Nora's face turned from fear to pity. "Oh, Bernice. Yes, of course. He's right here." As the phone hung there, suspended in my lover's hand, it beckoned me. Before I touched it, the faces of my mom and dad flashed before my eyes as the light flashed from the summer storm through the curtains. My heart was pressing to escape my chest. "Aunt Bernice?" "Finnegan! Finnegan!" she cried over and over, through the gasps, through her tears. Finally interrupting her shattered heart, "Aunt Bernice, please, what's wrong?" I asked, not wanting an answer, really. "It's your mom and dad, Finnegan. Oh, God, I'm sorry." She trailed off again. A male voice spoke in her place. "Finnegan? Who's this? What about my mom and dad?" I was trembling. "It's Larry. Finnegan, there's been a fire. Your house, your parents' house. I'm sorry, Finnegan. They didn't make it out." The rain was heavy on the roof. The windows were lit up with lightning dancing in the sky. I don't remember much of the conversation after that. I do remember lying there, crying uncontrollably, while Nora cried with me. 2. I suppose it isn't saying much when I tell you the trip was terrible, at least for the most part. We did board the plane, which was already booked, so I suppose I was thankful for that, only for plans of bereavement rather than enjoyment. We spent much of our time with Aunt Bernice, and Larry when he'd come out of his room, the funeral director, and a couple of meals at Dad's favorite place. On our first full day, in the morning, we went to the diner. On the way in, we were interrupted by an old neighbor, Roscoe, an older gentleman who wanted to talk about Dad. Nora and Cassidy were friendly, but after a couple of minutes of him talking about anything but Dad, they excused themselves. "We'll go ahead and get us a booth," Nora said. I gave her a look. She smiled. They had enough time to eat an entire breakfast before I was able to break away. I was a little relieved to see they hadn't eaten yet when I did come in, though. They were sitting in the same booth that Dad and I sat in once before. Flo was sitting down with Nora and Cassidy. It didn't even cross my mind that Dad would have been missed in that establishment. I walked up to Flo, who was crying, grieving Dad's departure. Cassidy held her hand and wept with her. Even now, I cannot recall if my little girl went more than 20 minutes that first 3 days without crying. "Oh, goodness. Look at me. I bet I'm a mess," our waitress said. The girls disagreed. I said nothing, as I couldn't take my eyes from her running mascara. She stood, then leaned over to me, placed her hand on my chin, and said, "Your Mom and Dad were so proud of you." I held back emotion. Nora smiled across the table with sadness in her eyes. Even though Dad was proud, and I knew he was, I was looking forward to introducing my new life to my old life, that the two wouldn't stand alone, but as one story. 3. The little bell hanging from the top of the glass door rang as we walked in. Nora and I were back again for breakfast at the beginning of our second full day. Cassidy was staying with Aunt Bernice for the morning. "Nora, Finnegan," our waitress called. "Hey, Dana," Nora called back. Dana? I looked at our waitress in the eyes. They were blue, same as her uniform. Her hair, blonde and poorly cut, framed her face like she had a box for a hat. Then, turning back to Nora, I asked loud enough for only her to hear. "Dana? That's her name?" "Yeah, why? You didn't know that? How did you not know that? You met her years ago." No, I only met her the once, with Dad. And yesterday. Dad called her Flo, at least in the beginning. I mean, I knew that wasn't her name." As we sat talking in our booth, Dana called across the floor, "Coffee coming up." "Please and thank you," said Nora back as she wiggled into her seat. I stared at Dana as she worked a table that was all men. I recognized 2 of them, but I didn't know them. And they seemed to know her. They treated her well. Even though she was pleasant, smiling, she was worn-looking. Her age was hard to guess because of it. "She's a sweet lady," Nora said as she followed my look. "Yeah, I guess," I responded thoughtfully. "Say, did she happen to say where she was from?" "No. Wait, yes. While you were talking with Roscoe for 5 hours yesterday, she told us her life story, basically." She grinned, teasing me of my misfortunate encounter. "She moved here from Vermilion after her son was born. A bad story, really. Really bad." My head began to feel light. "Vermilion?" "Yeah. Why do you care so much?" "Son?" "Good morning," Dana said as she put down our cups. She filled them, still leaving a line between the cups, connecting them. "I'll be right back." "Okay," said Nora. Then to me, "What's going on?" "Oh my God. I'm sorry, honey. I'm going to be sick." I got up and jetted to the parking spaces at the side of the building. I began to dry heave. "Baby." Nora's hand was on my back. "I'll be okay. I just can't eat right now. That's all." "Want me to tell her we'll be back later?" "That would be great. Tell her I'm sorry." 4. Aside from a footlocker with army supplies I wasn't supposed to have kept, everything else from my first life was at Mom and Dad's. I envisioned my yearbooks sitting on the bookshelf, or what was left of them, burned beyond recognition. Nora was showing me mercy by not giving me a hard time about my sickly and unusual display at the diner. We drove our rental car to the place of which my childhood home used to wait. I didn't want to go, but we both thought it would be important to do nonetheless. All the homes on the block stood just as they always had, with only a few minor changes. A tree is taller, a home had been painted. But there was a black hole in the midst of it all, both in the literal and figurative sense. We ignored the yellow "Danger, do not cross" tape that surrounded the home by stepping over it. The smell was like a fire would smell, except it was bitter, putrid slightly, but bearable, even with my recent parking lot infirmity considered. As we stood where the kitchen would have been, Nora pressed up beside me, wrapping her arm around my waist. She grabbed my arm with her other hand, lifting it up and over to place it around her shoulders, forcing me to take part in her comfort. She began to speak part of a poem written by Anne Bradstreet. "No pleasant tale shall here be told, nor things recounted done of old. No candle shall shine in thee, nor bridegroom's voice ere heard shall be. In silence ever shalt thou lie. Adieu, adieu, all's vanity." The wind gave a gust. It was still a bit chilly across the prairie grasslands. I pointed. Aunt Bernice said over there was where Mom and Dad were, where they found them, next to the back door. "Oh, honey, we don't need to," said they were holding hands. "I don't know if that's true," I said as I controlled my emotions. Nora looked at the black, charred nothing. "One of them must have been trying to help the other?" she asked. That's what one of the firefighters said to Aunt Bernice. That's what she said, anyways. Could be true, I guess. "Well, I believe it." I nodded in affirmation. "Nora, about Troy." "Troy? What about him, honey?" "I am wondering if Dana, in the diner, I'm wondering if Troy knew her when he was in school down there." "Why didn't you ask her?" Oh my goodness." She stepped away from me to get a look at my face. "Please don't tell me what I think you're thinking." "Troy left a letter," I confessed. "A letter? When was this?" "It's in my Bible. He'd put it in my Bible before he, you know." "Oh, you found it when you got it out of the attic?" Her head tilted along with the corner of her mouth as if she were saying in her head, "Bless your heart." I looked down. She responded to my guilty countenance. "Finnegan, how long have you known this?" I groaned, closed my eyes. "Years." "Finnegan, why wouldn't you—" "He had just died, Nora. I knew it was the cheap way out, to blame Troy's suicide. But because it would keep some of Nora's interrogation ashore, I used it anyway." She sighed and kicked a charred piece of something on the flimsy floor. "So how are you linking the two? He just confessed it all?" "Just mentioned her name, Dana. Said he met her there off campus. I don't think she was a student." "So he attacked Dana?" she asked, avoiding the R word. "Yeah." Holy cow. She was piecing things together in her head. "Why didn't she press charges?" "I'm not sure. I suppose there's a possibility that it's not even her, but it seems to add up, doesn't it? I've been understanding all this time that he didn't know her, that he just met her a drunk night. He only knew her first name. That's what I've assumed, anyways. He mentioned in the letter that her brothers were after him, so they must have known something about Troy, at least something to have—" "Her brothers?" Nora interrupted. "Her brothers are dead, Finnegan." I waited for her to continue. I was confused. Her comment derailed me for a moment. "Dana's brothers. She told you she had brothers? So then it has to be her. When did they die?" "It was after not long after she was... They were traveling for work, headed to Fargo for some construction job." "North? From Vermilion to Fargo?" "Nora, what little town is in between?" "Right here. Yeah, it was part of their trip. She said they were stopping at the grandparents' house, a farm just outside of Salt Creek. I can't remember their names, but they didn't make it. The brothers. They went off the road, a straight road, no hills, no curves, she said. But right before a creek somewhere off the road, missed the edge of the bridge and went down the embankment. Some kid fishing found their truck through the thick and straddling the creek a couple days after it happened. The truck was smashed, nose first, right into the other side of the creek. Both of them dead. Beer cans everywhere. So how did Dana end up here? In Salt Creek? Yeah. Family was broken after that. She didn't say too much, just that she moved here to get away from the constant yelling and screaming. She must have never told her parents or grandparents about the crime against her, although she told us freely. She lives on the farm now, just she and her son. She has lost everything. Family, I mean. Her brothers died, her grandparents died within a year of each other. Her parents divorced. Her mom shot herself. Or was that her dad? One or the other shot themselves, and the other remarried and moved to Utah.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God.
I told you it was bad. It's the worst story I've ever heard. And that was yesterday, before knowing Troy was in the mix. We both shook our heads in thought, distracted from the blackness in which we stood. Nora spoke. So the brothers knew something. Well, they did chase him. From the car where it happened to the school. At the very least, they must have figured out who he was. We looked at one another as we both thought of the same thing. I said, Dana doesn't know any of this. She doesn't know Troy, his name, where he was from, nothing. It was just some drunk jerk, according to her. I bet her brothers were just going to take care of it. Take care of Troy. That would make sense. They must have been keeping what had happened away from their parents, maybe. Probably shame. Maybe. Oh, my goodness, if she knew this, it would kill her. What do you mean? Oh, because, yeah, it would. We need to never say anything to anyone about this. Yeah, it would only hurt Dana. It would do no one any good. We stood, looking around us, taking in the insanity of the conversation in the midst of where mourning should take place. We walked from one place to stand safely to the next, poking at things with a stick, identifying insignificant things. One of the rusty clothesline poles stood in the backyard, untouched, without the tiniest scorch. The other pole, the one on which the blackbird sat, was gone. I couldn't remember if it was there the last time I was home. My reflex was to call out to Dad. 5. I was thankful for Aunt Bernice. Between her extreme, tear-filled outbursts, she was helpful during that time. She knew the attorney who handled Mom and Dad's tiny estate. She knew the funeral director personally. He, in turn, helped us through the funeral and burial process, something Dad prepaid for years ago, against Mom's will. She was the one who reached out to all of Mom and Dad's friends, and all our family. I was useless, floating around like an orphaned child. Dana was there with her blue-eyed son. Nora stood near me, holding Cassidy's hand, her face red but encouraged by the love people expressed to her regarding her grandma and grandpa. Nora glanced at me, giving me a smile of pity as some man, a man I didn't know, shook my hand. Nora left Cassidy for a moment to approach her friend. She hugged her as if she had been long lost. I was surprised to see the Wilsons there, at the funeral, together. Cambry's new child wasn't in tow. Each of them nudged their way through the crowd, brushing past the broken waitress as if there was no connection in the world between them. I suppose there weren't any, as far as they were concerned. Nora was approached by Mr. Baker. He seemed to have aged so much since the last time I saw him. It was at Lou's, just before Lou closed the place down permanently. He kissed Nora's cheek. Nora introduced Cassidy as if it were the first time he'd met her, which he had, twice before, I think. Since Ruth passed, he'd just not been the same. We left straight away after the funeral service to get to the airport on time. Father Deevy was nice enough, and he did say many nice things about two people he barely knew. Dad, if he could be aware from a spiritual world, would have loved the service, ironically. And I'm sure if it were possible, he would have joined us afterward and talked about it in detail. Aunt Bernice wanted us to stay one more night, but the thought of being under the roof again with Larry the Creep was more than any of us could stand. My back couldn't take another night on the pull-out anyways. His nickname was the creation of Nora. She wasn't too sensitive when it came to Larry. In private, she had other names for him, such as Larry the Jerk, Larry the Weirdo, or Larry the Mooch, all descriptive and to the point. The plane back was just as small as the one coming in, a Boeing 717. The seat configuration was 2 seats on one side of the aisle and 3 seats on the other. Because we changed flights for the second leg at the last second, we couldn't all sit together. Nora sat across the aisle from me, row 20. Cassidy and I sat in seats A and B. She took the window, I sat on the aisle, which I preferred. We were losing an hour, but it would seem like more due to the proximity to the time zones that Salt Creek and St. Simons were in, respectively. I gave a college try in explaining this to Cassidy, but she wouldn't even humor me with pretending she understood or even cared. Instead, she pressed her face against my sleeve and wept the way only a sweet little girl can.